Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Al and I. I hope that you can see me. I hope that someone will write a comment so that I can see that I'm actually live. So I'll just start. This feels really odd to me sitting here knowing you're out there. You are out there. But I really wanted to say thank you for coming and for watching the launch, and to thank everyone for all your wonderful support and lovely comments and congratulations. Oh, thank you, Dee. I can see someone's there. That's really great. And to say thank you to all of those who've already bought the book. You're all wonderful. I know that this is a very different night from what I had planned and hoped for, but I'm really so thrilled with how it's all worked out. A great thanks to Alison Goodman. You are just wonderful, darling, with your exuberance and calmness and professionalism. I do have to say that I feel that despite the way the world has gone so topsy-turvy, that I feel very fortunate. The writing community has just been amazing, and the reach out and the wonderful offers and opportunities that have come from so many people, so many writers, so many podcasts have given me probably far more exposure than I could have hoped to have had ordinarily, and kept me really, really busy and really, really distracted. So in the beginning, when I first thought, oh, I think this launch might not come about, and I thought, gee, I'm handling this really, really well, until I got the email, and then there were a few tears. But ever since, you've all been so fantastic, and everybody's been sending me photos of buying the book, and I found out today that a book group is doing it next, which is really exciting, and a few other little things that I can't quite share yet. But I am just thrilled to be here and have a brief chat, because I really wanted to be able to thank you all in person. And I know some people haven't been able to comment, and I'm sorry for that. I think it's something to do with the group settings, but it is so wonderful to see so many of you here. And I do have a question from Holly. Holly, is there one character you wish you could have explored more in the book? I have to be careful how much I say, because I don't know how many of you have read it yet, but I think if I was going to explore anybody, I probably would have quite liked to have gone into Liam, the second main character's viewpoint, because I have had some people not like him, but most people who have commented to me have been able to understand why he is the way he is. And I think that's something that I would have liked to have explored more from his viewpoint. But it was very much Mary's story, and I wanted it to be the woman's viewpoint, not the man's. They've had plenty of time with war stories and many, many stories that have focused on men in the wartime. And I wanted to talk about Mary and what life would be like for a woman who had a man who came back from war, and how difficult it was during the war when you're let down. So he would have definitely been a priority for me if I'd had a chance. But I have been asked what I hope readers would take from No Small Shame, and I think that it's probably a greater understanding and appreciation of how ordinary women had to take really small steps to get a voice, to find a voice, and to find agency to direct their futures. When you're very poor, no job, no station in society, you're under the strictures of your religion. For many women in wartime, they didn't have a lot of choice in what they did, because there was a great sense of you had a patriotic duty to men anyway. They were grateful, and some of them were not very well treated. But it really was to be about how women make very small steps in those days to get forward. I had in mind that young women today must look back and say, why didn't women rebel much sooner? Why did they wait to the 60s to burn their bras and do whatever it was that they started to do to march forward and say, hey, there's a huge imbalance here and we're not happy? Why did it take so long? And why did we have 2 world wars? And why didn't it make a major difference? But it's because they didn't have a voice, and there was no rebellion in those days. They couldn't, or they would have been very quickly put back in their place. If it wasn't them, it would have been the church or society that would have done it for them. And I wanted to show that they were working towards it, but it did take time for women to gain agency. And I have another question from Sarah. Recent events have forced authors to become more creative with their launch events. My daughter, this question is from. And you've been promoting the book in some really interesting and potentially terrifying ways. How have you found this process, and has it taken out of your comfort zone? Well, I think my daughter Sarah actually knows it has considerably taken me out of my comfort zone. But I was thinking about it this morning and I thought, you know what, it's probably a really good thing, and I'm going to look back on this later and say it was terrific. It was like being thrown in at the deep end, because I went from not having a professional public presence, and in the last few weeks I've done 2 radio interviews, 2 podcasts, several interviews, and I've just had to do it because the opportunities were there. And I thought, I have a book out. I really believe in this book. I want this book to fly, and I want word of it to get out. And, you know, there was the fear the bookshops would close, as many of them are, though the online bookstores are still going. But I believe in this book, and I believe it deserves to fly. And I have to do everything I can to let the world know that it's out there. So that's my answer to that. One more question. Oh yes, I have been asked in a couple of things, interestingly, if I've personally experienced any of the challenges that Mary faced. Well, I'm very happy to say that I didn't have a teenage pregnancy. I'm grateful for that. But I was raised Catholic, and it was very much part of our lives, the church on Sunday and the confession, etc. And I was fine with it until my teenage years. And then, just like Mary, I did start to question different things that I was told. I could see what the rules were, but I could see that they didn't equal what was going on in society. And I think the greatest thing for me was, at one time I was watching the news, and there was a young couple there who was seeking dispensation from the Catholic Church to be married, and they were denied permission to be married because they were both, I think they were paraplegics, and they couldn't consummate the marriage, and so the Catholic Church refused permission for them to the church. And I was incensed and could not believe that any church that held itself up to be all loving, forgiving, kind could possibly do that. And that I think was the beginning of it. And then I did begin to question many things, and did begin to think that there was a lot of brainwashing going on in the church. So I decided that I would just talk about God when I had my own children, and not brainwash them, and they're all a pack of little heathens, so I can't do much about that. But yeah, I think that there was often a friction in teenage years, but I think that Mary did question what she saw, but it took a long time, because she was so young too, to break free of that. But for me, yeah, I did have that friction, because the rules were the rules, and you had to obey them. If the church said it, you had to. I could talk to my mum, and she was a lot more open to talk to it, but Dad was a bit more like, no, this is the rules, so you need to obey the rules. Holly, do you think it's important to be historically accurate when writing fiction set in the past? Yes, I do, for the most part. Though I'm a strong believer that story will rule for me over the history, but I guess I was fortunate that because mine were entirely fictional characters, I didn't have to fit into the specifics of a real person to oblige what they did. But I did have to work my timeline to work in because it needed to fit the history of what was happening. I do like disclaimers. I did change, there was Luna Park, they did close for wartime frivolity and they were only open for special patriotic events, and I did switch the actual date of when that was to suit the story, but I did put it in the disclaimer in the back of the book. But I do think if you're going to write historically, the history has to be important, so therefore you need to honour that in your fiction. So I would never tweak it desperately, but to make the story work, I would use a little bit of poetic license. Anyway, I really want to thank you all for coming. I'm so thrilled to see so many of you there, and it's been really fun. I thought this might be really weird and strange to be sitting here talking to a screen. Oops, I've got another question from Jane. Did your research show Australian mines offered better conditions? I think they did, and I think that was part of the attraction of coming to Australia. But the coal mine here, particularly the main one that I know about, but I think they were all pretty much the same, they were different from the Scottish mines because the Scottish mines were very deep, and the men had to go down lifts. They didn't walk into the mines like they did here. In Wonthaggi, the pit ponies came up at the end of every day, and they went back every morning and walked in, whereas in Bothwell Hall, the pit ponies went down into the mine once a year, and they stayed there for the entire year, and they only came up for the 2 weeks of fair fortnight in July. And the mines were dangerous, the tunnels were a lot narrower, and there were a lot more mining accidents. They took a lot more care here in Wonthaggi. They did have mining accidents here too, but not the horrific cave-ins that they had in Scotland. And I mean, even now I can see the difference, because when I went there in 2010 and went down a shaft, not down deep into a coal mine, but down the shaft that they would have started off to go down, it did have a little of extra shoring up to protect the tourists, and we had halogen lights in our hats and torches, and in we went about 100 meters, and then they turned the lights off, and it was so dark. You think you know what dark is, but to me that was incredibly dark, and I think my overactive imagination was, and nobody was allowed to speak for a minute, so it was just totally dark and quiet, and I could imagine what it would be like. And I was also thinking back to 150 years before, when small boys and girls and women went down the mine too. But when I wanted to go through the Wonthaggi coal mine, at first it was closed to do certain structural things to make sure it was safe for tourists, and when I walked in there it was all concreted walls, so entirely different experience, and certainly it was for the miners. Question from Celia. Did you visit the exhibit at the State Library earlier this year that had one of the mines in Gippsland where the ashes were? No, I didn't. I didn't even know it was on. Sorry, I was pretty busy at the beginning of the year, but no, I'm sorry I missed that. What's the most interesting fact you learnt while researching that I didn't know before? I think I had assumed that the women here had the same rights as women, or not rights, but freedoms that women in Britain did during the war. And when I very first started writing the draft, I was writing that um, the women here were driving ambulances and etc. And then thought, oh look, I better go and check exactly what the facts were during the war. And then found out that no, women in Australia weren't expected to work. They were expected to knit socks and make pajamas, and eventually they did get some jobs in munitions and uh, factories making uniforms and things like that, but they did not have the roles that they did in England, where they got to take on a lot of the men's roles. Here they were considered not important for them to do that, though I don't think that nearly so many of our population percentage went as what they did in Britain. Was there any one character you particularly enjoyed writing? I was going to say Mary, because I love Mary, and she was a joy to write because she had such a big journey, and started off very young and then went all the way through to being a married woman with children. So hers was such an evolution over that time as her attitudes and her confidence grew and her experiences challenged her. But to be truthful, I guess more. She was a fascinating and contradictory character because from the point of view that a couple of early readers, I had people who say, oh, she's just dreadful. I think Alison said the other day she just wanted to slap her. But, I had other people say that more is lovely, and I don't know why Mary is so impatient with her. So whether the writing of it changed over the time, but I think More was a woman of huge contradictions. She had expectations, but I think she really didn't want Mary to be hurt. But her ability to empathise was completely lacking with her daughter, and the friction was always there. But yeah, I found that incredibly interesting to write, and fun at times, and shocking at times too. Anyway, I really want to say thank you very much to everyone for coming. If anyone's missed part of the launch itself video, I will put a link in to the event and also on my profile. It's on my YouTube channel, which sounds incredibly pretentious, but I had to start one to be able to upload it onto YouTube. But before I go, I really want to say the biggest thank you to my darling daughter Sarah, who has been feeding me the questions tonight and letting me know when things weren't working, and to stop me peering at the screen to check out the questions. I want to say thank you to the brilliant Alison Goodman for all her wonderful support and beautiful job launching No Small Shame. And thank you everyone for being with me and sharing this night and helping welcome No Small Shame into the world. Go forth, buy your very own copy, though I know many of you have already, or at least order it online. The bookshops really need our support. Buy lots of books. They're going to save our souls and our sanity, and your purchase will help buy our publishing future. So thank you very, very much, everybody. Good night. Can't wait to read all your comments. Bye.